I think that what's interesting is that at times of tumult in the United States of America, the 50s and 60s, now, you see candidacies, often to the center right, but sometimes of either party, who come out on this kind of law and order platform, this idea that we need to regain control of what's happening, or things will become chaos. Right? And so at the time we're in, we think of the last few years, we have seen riots in various cities. We've seen angry protests, people in the streets, people upset. That scares a lot of people. People who aren't comfortable with that, people whose lives are plenty happy and who are comfortable. They don't like the idea that the freeway is shut down. They don't like the idea that people are angry or yelling at the police officers. And what they desire is someone who's going to come and tell them, I'm going to handle this, I'm going to get things back to the way they were. Now, there's a false promise there, because the way things were previously was not any better. We just perhaps weren't paying attention to it. There's always unrest. There are always people who are in pain. There are always protests happening. But we've been in a moment where we've had an acute awareness of that pain that is different than the moments previously. And so it's unsurprising. Donald Trump becomes one of the first candidates since Nixon to so successfully wield this law and order type of platform. And so while that comforts some people, people on the other end of the spectrum are horrified by that, right? What might that mean? If you are the young black man or woman who's been in the street protesting, what might that mean for you? If you're one of these activists, if you are, what does he's invoked things about, potential nationwide stop and frisk, which horrifies a lot of people. He's talked about the crackdowns on immigrants, and that horrifies a lot of people. And so there's this understanding that we have this spectrum of security and liberty. And that will people's liberty be taken in order to provide a greater level of security? Because very often in those moments of fear, when we are scared of what is going to happen and what is happening in our world, those end up being the moments very often where we make, historically, some of the worst decisions we've made as it relates to respecting the liberty of some of our fellow Americans. Protest in and of itself is a foundational block of our democracy. That this is, in fact, before we had the right to vote, we had the right to protest, right? That it's the First Amendment. It is the first thing that the founders decided to enshrine in our Constitution, was this idea to petition your government. And not to petition your government by giving a bunch of money or by casting a ballot, but rather by raising your voice. You have the ability to petition your government. I think that protest serves various purposes, right? Protest. We often see protests, and we often, especially those of us in the media, look at them dismissively. What do they want? What are they going to get out of this? What's the point? What are they really asking for? Why didn't they go vote instead? And I think that largely misses the point of protest and why people come to the streets. People protest when they feel as if the other avenues of democracy have not served them. When you are a young college student in Portland who voted for Hillary Clinton in a blue state, and that doesn't really matter or have any bearing on who wins or who does not win the election, right? I think it's unsurprising that so many of the demonstrations we're seeing are in deep liberal cities within blue states. People whose votes, frankly, didn't really matter in terms of the outcome. Someone who lives in New York, someone who lives in LA or Oakland, right? Chicago. The protest is a means of petitioning your government. Protest is a means of community, of taking an individual voice that by itself might be weak and compounding it with other voices that now collectively become strong. Would the mayor of any of these cities take the call of the individual? Maybe they would, but maybe they would not. Would the governor, would the president address one person standing on the street saying, no, this is unacceptable? Probably not. Would he address 50? Would he address 100 or 100,000? Well, perhaps they would, right? It's a means of amplifying a message, and it's also a means of physical resistance, of saying, this thing that is in front of me, whether this is a police shooting, whether this is an incoming presidential administration, is something that I object to and that I will not stand down for. And you will have to deal with me in the political pressure created by my presence. And so I think that protest is powerful because of the community it creates, and of that community can be birthed all types of activism and organization that then leads to long-term change. I got to Cleveland in December 2014, which was not long after the decision to not charge Darren Wilson and Ferguson had been announced, and the decision not to charge the officer in the death of Eric Gardner had been announced. And as protests were re-breaking out in all these cities, there had also been another shooting, that of 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Cleveland. And so as protests were breaking out in New York and in St. Louis, Cleveland also had seen this surge of activism. And Cleveland initially wasn't very happy with this. The police handled the protests pretty well. They kind of guided them. They let them march. They let them shut down freeways. But the mayor began receiving all these complaints about it. Why was the freeway shut down? Why did you let them do this? And he called a press conference to discuss the ongoing investigations into the shootings and to discuss the protests. And he said, you know, protesting, the shutdown of the freeway, is the cost, it's the inconvenience of freedom, that he went to bat for the First Amendment rights of these demonstrators. That's something that we've now seen many more police departments do, follow that model. But Mayor Jackson, Frank Jackson in Cleveland was one of the first to really do this, and I thought it sent quite a message about the role of protest in democracy.